Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. We're going to be covering the topic of 11 red flags to watch out for when working with an agency. Presenting for you today will be myself. My name is Kayla Kurtz. I'm the Senior Digital Advisor here at Hannafin Marketing. I also blog for our blog PPC Hero and MC Hero Conf every year, which will be in London in October. It's just a few months away. Presenting with me today is going to be Danny. I'm going to let him introduce himself because he'll do a much better job than I will.
Thanks, Kayla. Hi, my name is Danny Frisha. I'm a digital advisor at Hannafin Marketing. I also write for PPC Hero blog, and this past year at HeroConf Philly was my first year as a HeroConf MC. Feel free to tweet at me at Danny Frisha PPC. Always happy to have a conversation about PPC.
Awesome. Likewise, feel free to tweet at me as well at 1-800-KAYLA. Danny and I are constantly on Twitter, so we'd love to have a conversation with you guys.
Yeah, so joining on the conversation today, we would love to hear your thoughts and questions. Include the hashtag ThinkPPC in any of your tweets, or use the webinar question box to send us some questions. We'll have plenty of time for that at the end of the session. Just a brief moment, just let's get a live poll going for question number one. How long have you been in PPC? Select one of the following. Is it less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, or 5+ years in the industry? We'll give you a couple seconds for that.
Danny, how long, I already know the answer to this question, but we'll pretend we don't know each other really, really well. How long have you been in PPC?
Oh man, it's been over 7 years now. I was in-house for a little over 3 years, and then moved over to the agency side in New York, and then joined Hennepin 2 years ago. So quite a bit on both sides. What about you, Kayla?
Yeah, all of my PPC experience is here at Hannafin, but I just had my 5-year anniversary in February. So for the first time, I get to select option number 4 on this one and being in paid search for 5+ years.
Sweet, homegrown.
Awesome. So it looks like our results, 42% of our attendees today have been in paid search for less than 1 year, so a little bit newer to the industry. And then a pretty even split in 1 to 3 years and 3 to 5 years at 21 and 26% respectively. But it looks like we do have at least a few with 5+ years experience coming in at 11%. So really good split here with some more and slightly less experienced folks in the PPC world. Well, without any further ado, we want to go ahead and get started and jump into today's content. Danny and I specifically work within the business development and sales department here at Hannafin, coming from a PPC management background previously, and then moving over into the sales side to really try to make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible for prospective new clients as they are either leaving another agency or moving their in-house management over to Team Hannafin. So we feel like we have run into a large spectrum of different red flags that we see as we start to uncover where particular brands are with their current agency, which was the reason we put this content together for you today. So let's go ahead and get started with red flag number 1. So a big problem that we see in the PPC industry across the board is a general lack of transparency, and this can come in a few different forms, whether it's not having account access directly to AdWords, Bing Ads, or a platform that is being utilized on your campaigns. To also include if it's an agency-specific proprietary software or platform, and you have no view through whatsoever into what's being implemented within the campaigns. All the way through, you do get reports from the agency and you're able to log into your accounts, but when you get on your weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly calls, it seems like you're only getting good news, and you can notice some negative performance movement in your data, but the agency kind of glosses over that and just moves on to only the good news pieces. Those are kind of large red flags, right? Because it simply means that there's just not enough transparency and understanding from both sides on really where performance is. Because performance is, let's be honest, never going to be always positive. If it were, our jobs would be so much easier, right? But knowing that if you are in an agency client relationship from either end, really just sharing all of that information, whether it's good or bad, is going to be of benefit to everyone, because then you can have a really positive dialogue about how to fix even the things that aren't going well. And again, if you are on the client side and listening in today and you don't have access to your accounts, start digging into what the reasoning might be there. It could simply be an oversight where the agency took over your access point and you've just never gotten a new one. But making sure that you have a way to track project and task progress through either a project management software like Basecamp, or actually being able to log into your accounts themselves and take a look at things. It's a pretty important piece of the transparent communication there.
All right, red flag number 2, the reactive approach. So between tackling issues as they arise and being ready for them before they come up. One thing you want to look into when working with an agency is how engaged they really are in the account that you hired them for. If on a weekly or biweekly or monthly basis, whenever you have your set call schedule, if they're just reacting to what you're bringing up as issues within the account, that's a huge red flag, right? They're not engaged in the day-to-day. They're not pinpointing areas that might be troubling right now or in the future. So you want to be sure that your agency is engaged in the day-to-day, is looking into potential issues, whether it's new competitors coming into the market, if there's a slip in position, things of that nature. It is a good sign that they're engaged in the account on a daily basis, that they're looking into things, they're pulling reports, they're optimizing. The things you want to avoid is the agency where they put it on the back burner. They're not looking at things on a daily basis to make things better within the account. And then additionally, on top of that, even when there's not issues going on within the account, just taking a more proactive approach to expansion, understanding your target market, what platform makes sense in terms of testing to move the needle and move things forward and make sure you're maximizing the potential of the account with the agency. So keep in mind that the agency, it's their job to come to you with problems as well as potential expansion opportunities and tackling things before they become bigger issues.
Yeah, I think Danny, you picked out a really important point there, right? Which is there are going to be scenarios where you can't see necessarily what's coming from a performance standpoint. So by no means are we implying that your agency should only ever be proactive and they're never going to be reacting to a performance change or a question that you have. They'll never really be able to be hitting all of those key points at once, but you want to have a really good balance between the proactive and reactive sides of things. And again, like you said, Danny, right, you as the agency, you should be coming to the client with those new ideas and that fresh perspective, because that's what they hire an agency for in the first place.
Yep.
Awesome. So moving on to red flag number 3, being that you have a single point of contact with your agency. So it can definitely seem like a benefit to just have one point of contact at your agency, because then you know very specifically who you can go to, who will be able to answer your questions, come up with those ideas like Danny mentioned about expansion, etc. And it makes it so that there's no confusion or muddied communication. But the problem with that is that people take vacations from time to time, and on the worst case scenario end of the spectrum, what happens if that account manager leaves the agency completely? You'll more than likely then find yourself in a scenario where you have to retrain your new account manager on the way we phrase it is how you like your coffee made, which really comes down to things like how often and what you like your reports to look like, how frequently you may have a new promotion that's rolling out, and how much lead time they need to have from you to get things ready like ad copy and keyword research, etc. So having a team assigned to your account really assists in making sure that not only do you have multiple points of contact if you have questions, issues, concerns, but you also then have the very distinct positive piece of that where those different people can all have their eyes on sort of a separate piece of your total account scope. So you have an account manager that's running the day-to-day stuff and optimizing bids, budgets, keywords, taking a look at competitors on a weekly basis and whatnot. But then you also have someone who's maybe in more of like an associate director role, like we have here at Hannafin for our enterprise clients. And they're looking, yes, a little bit at the day-to-day stuff with your account manager, but they're very specifically tasked with looking more long-term, year-over-year type data and seasonality sort of things, and helping prepare the account manager for things they should be implementing today that they may not necessarily really need to start using or be able to use for a few months. And then another piece of that team could be what we have at Hannafin, again, called a client services manager, who really has little to nothing to do with the PPC daily work and optimization, but they're there specifically to have a conversation with the client about how we're doing as an agency overall. So they're not talking to you necessarily about data and metrics and performance, but even when things are going well, asking questions about whether you feel there's enough proactive strategy being implemented, whether the communication is frequent enough, whether we're getting back to you quickly, things of that nature, to really make sure that, again, all aspects of the account have someone who is manning that ship, and they can really keep their focus in those areas. So again, if you're looking at just one point of contact at your agency, it could very well be doing a great job, but then there's also an opportunity for you to have to do some retraining if that person leaves or even just moves to another account. And then there also may be areas of your campaigns that aren't getting as much attention as they need.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gilla. Just piggybacking off of that, like one of the key things in a client agency relationship is fully understanding the client's business and how they go about their business and their target market. And it should be a little bit tiresome on the front end to train people. So you don't want to go through that over and over and over again if they're always switching out account managers and things of that nature. So that's definitely a red flag.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Moving along to red flag number 4, fees look too good to be true. So as you go through the process, obviously the cost of an agency is a factor. There's no doubt about that, and some are more expensive than others. But if an agency is giving you free months, or the fees are incredibly, like, a lot lower than the other agencies, there's a chance that it really is too good to be true, because the time and the energy that goes into managing an account appropriately, it has a certain cost to it. There's overhead to running the business. There's employees and their time. So they may be cutting corners. They may also be putting work in on the front end and just setting things to autopilot, or putting it into their bid management platform and just letting it run, and just checking in on it on a weekly basis. Just not using their resources as best as they should be. So you definitely want to analyze the fees of each of the agencies that you're talking to, but also dive a little bit deeper into that and see what it is that they are providing in terms of services, the time that they're putting in, the team that they're putting towards the account. So definitely be thorough with that as you talk to agencies or with your agency, to really get a true understanding of what exactly they're doing on a daily and weekly and monthly basis for you.
Yeah, definitely. And Danny, I think another thing that you and I see fairly often, because we have that very specific fee conversation towards the end of a sales cycle here at our own agency. And, sometimes you'll be looking at 1 to 2 percentage points difference between Hannafin's fee structure and another agency that they're looking at. And the caution that I always give is, if that's really what you need to make your decision based off of, absolutely make the decision that you feel like is best for your team and for the budget that you have right now, but just be wary of the autopilot mentality. So really the best way for an agency that's charging a little bit of a lower fee structure, and I'm not saying that they all do this, but they're able to offer that lower fee structure because after the initial 2 or 3 months maybe, it goes into a little bit more of an autopilot mode. So there's not that really active optimization strategy and process behind the campaigns. They sort of dial some stuff in and then back out a bit so that they're able to then in the following 3 months after the initial 3 profitize the lack of fees that they were charging on the front end. And again, I have tons of friends in the agency world, right? So I hope nobody on PPC chat starts blowing us up about this. I'm sure everyone has a fee structure that works best for them. It's just something to be cognizant of and to keep awareness with, especially on the client side.
Yeah, and also this eggplant diet looks delicious.
Yeah, I think it probably works really well. Feast on your, they are eating like a giant piece of pizza and ice cream apparently and losing 2 pounds a day. And I call it shenanigans. Awesome. So moving on to red flag number 5. This is where you may be having an agency relationship where the agency is focusing a little bit more on interface level, also known as non-KPI metrics for your brand. So yes, let's get this out and in the clear right now. Cost per click, click-through rate, what we call leading indicator metrics, like quality score. Those are all really important pieces that you need to discuss because at the end of the day, if your click-through rates are down, if your quality scores are down, and if your cost per click is too high, all of that is going to come out in the wash at the end of the main KPI metric story. So you want to keep a running dialogue about those leading indicator metrics, but you should only be talking to them as they relate to the metrics that matter most for your account. So these tend to be return on ad spend, return on investment, lead volume, average order values, cost per acquisition, cost per lead, whatever you're calling it for your brand. And in a little bit, we're going to talk a bit more about what that overall goal focus should look like and really even looking beyond the interface level KPI. But in this area in particular, just be wary if your agency is focusing mostly on those leading indicator metrics, particularly when they're reporting on those numbers because the conversion-based metrics closer to the back end of the conversion funnel aren't performing as well as the leading indicators. So they turn into more of a distraction piece rather than explaining that here's what we're seeing with cost per acquisition or cost per lead. And we've seen this also in the cost per click increasing. So here's the action plan of what we're going to do. Certainly, again, have these conversations. I always talk through the quality score picture and the impression share picture with our clients at the onset of a new engagement because it's where you can start digging in a bit further. But again, just make sure that these aren't the only metrics that you're talking about. And specifically, if you know your lead volume is down, but you can't get your agency to talk to you about anything except the fact that they decrease cost per click, they're just focused on the wrong metrics, and it's probably not best for the long-term health of your account.
Okay, so red flag number 6, offering more than PPC management. For a lot of the in-house people, it's always a conversation. Do I go with an all-in-one agency or do I go with hiring a couple different agencies to handle SEO, PPC, things of that nature? So you don't go to a general practitioner for a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist. So that's pretty self-explanatory, right? So if your main business is PPC, you want to go to a PPC specialist agency. They might be able to handle a little one-off things here and there, but overall, the dynamic and the growth that has been happening within digital marketing, Google, Bing, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, to go through all of that in terms of growth and then also cover other areas such as SEO or any other type of marketing that you're looking for, whether it's email, things of that nature. But I would recommend going to specific agencies that prioritize certain channels. So whether that means hiring 2 or 3 agencies at once. I know you're trying to limit the amount of agencies you have to deal with, but ultimately it comes down to performance. And if you're valuing performance over that, you want to go with an agency that specializes in that channel. So that would be my recommendation, as opposed to going with an agency that says, hey, yeah, we can cover anything you want, and then just kind of wing it without any specialization or professionals within the agency that know what they're doing.
Yeah, and one, an added note that sort of ties into that fee structure and when it maybe looks a little bit too good to be true. I think we run into that the most when we're talking to a prospective client that's working with one of those more all-in-one, all-encompassing agencies. And quite frankly, some of the time, the way that they're allowed, that they can really cover all of those different channels and offer such a competitive fee structure because they're actually outsourcing that work to another agency and white labeling it. And you'd be able to start picking up on that if you're having a conversation with your all-in-one agency account manager and you're asking some specific questions about what's happening with your PPC campaigns and performance, and they can't answer them. Probably means they're not actually doing the work. So just something to additionally be aware of.
Good point.
So I talked earlier about having more than one point of contact with your agency and really working in a team within the team at the agency that you are partnered with. But no matter whether you've got one person working with a full team, poor communication is a huge red flag if you're working with an agency and can't seem to keep an open dialogue rolling. So whether it's a lack of consistent communication, so you don't have scheduled meetings or calls on the calendar to review performance. Maybe it just in general takes way too long to hear back from your agency when you submit questions, concerns, things you want to discuss. Poor communication from your agency should definitely be a huge red flag. So at Hannafin, we know from experience that our best and most successful client relationships are those where we've got a really open dialogue and an open line of communication, because we also know that while we are phenomenal at PPC management, our clients know their company much better than we probably ever will. We do our best, like Danny mentioned earlier, to get as ingrained in their culture and understanding every piece and every side of their business as we can, but there will still always and forever be questions that we need our clients to answer so that we can implement things correctly for them. So if there isn't that open line of communication, we can't flesh out ideas. We can't get approval on things that we want to test on. And so, quite frankly, if you're not getting prompted for communication from your agency, that's probably a good indication that there are some really important details that are being missed out, overlooked, or maybe they have some really proactive ideas, but if you're not having that conversation, they don't have the clearance to go ahead and implement them on your behalf. So whether it's making sure that you have that really regulated weekly call or reports, or using, again, something like Basecamp, where even if you're not holding a call or a meeting between the client and the agency, that there's a place where communication can exist on an ongoing basis, and that you as the client can see what's being implemented, what tasks are being prioritized, and have a dialogue in that form of fashion.
Yep. I would also say that just that overall the actual relationship, it really is a partnership. So being able to get the communication from the client, it might directly impact what the agency is running for you, and you might not just know it. So just being transparent, having conversations about things that are going on, that way your team at the agency can be in the loop and be prepared for anything that may change within your PPC account or anything else that you're running with them.
Yeah, agreed.
So red flag number 8, no focus on bottom line goals. I think we touched upon this a little bit, but the agency's goals should be the goals that you have internally. So if, for example, you're working for an education company and you're focusing on enrollments, that agency should not only be focusing on the cost per leads that are coming through. So that's just one example of things. That's the ultimate result is the enrollments or the revenue that you're getting from your PPC account. They need to be engaged on that level just like you are. So if that's passing them over reports and marrying up data on a weekly basis to get a really true idea of how performance is within the account, if it's leading to actual success on the back end, that's the most important thing. And if they don't go to that level, or if they're unwilling to go to that level, that's a huge red flag, because you really have to see things through to the finish line. So conversion that revolve more around cost per whatever the client is looking for, rather than cost per lead or conversion volume that's within Google, for example, isn't telling the whole story. So definitely be conscious of that when you're working with your agency, and make sure that they're seeing things through and they're reporting back on what really matters internally.
Yeah, we see this probably the most with the clients that we represent in the education vertical, because cost per lead is great, But at the end of the day, it's more often than not that internal team within the client's walls are being graded on cost per enrollments, which can make things a little bit tough, right? Because it means you can't really optimize today off of last week's data. You've got to look at data from 6 months ago and see where those potential leads went in terms of setting up a meeting with an advisor, and then all the way through to actually enrolling in courses. So it's a much more longer term plan, and it requires you to really get some deeper understanding of what those cycles look like on the client side. But if you can just have the conversation with the team within the client and say, hey, we know we've brought down cost per lead by 20%, but what's happening with your enrollments? Are we actually driving out the wrong kinds of, are we pushing through the wrong kinds of leads and they're not actually turning into enrollments? You know, what are the true bottom metric effects of what it is that we're implementing? Clients really, truly appreciate that level of understanding. All right, so this brings us to red flag number 9, which is my favorite in the way that I find it to be the most frightening. So it's just something that, yeah, it's something that I think is super confusing. And without being too judgy, I never really understand how a client finds themselves in this scenario. And that's where the agency actually owns their accounts. Whether they can log into it from the client side or not, they don't actually have ownership of the AdWords, Bing, or whatever other engine account. So here's how we run into this. Part of the sales process at Hannafin, I mentioned this briefly earlier, is a piece of our program called the Solutions Blueprint. So what we do with the blueprint is we get read-only access to the client's, usually their AdWords account, and we put together an analysis on where we see room, where we could improve efficiencies, where we'd like to expand, things like that. About a handful of times a year, I would say, we get to this step and the prospect goes to give us account access and then clues us into the fact that they've noticed or it's been indicated to them that they don't actually have access to their accounts and they don't have administrative access, so therefore they can't provide us that read-only access that we need to do the solutions blueprint. This means a couple of different things. So the first means that if they don't have that administrative access, they can't see all the information they should be able to have access to, period. But in 99% of those scenarios, and this is the really scary part, they don't actually own their account. And when and if they go to break up with that agency, they could very well have to start from scratch. So it's happened a couple of times that even if they can get us access, then once they put in notice with that account, with that other agency, we go to open up the account the next week and everything's been wiped clean. So it's all been deleted because the agency started the account, and they've got the administrative right because they technically have ownership to zero it all out and sort of force the agency to start from scratch. Before anybody goes freaking out too much, there are ways to get around this. We've been able to get some assistance from the engine side where they can basically go back in and pull the information out of an old report and we can rebuild it. But there is still a little bit of traction that gets lost. So there's a clear issue with that. Everyone knows your AdWords account is like credit, right? It's sometimes better to have bad credit than no credit at all. So having to truly start over from an engine perspective is really going to put you, it's going to set you back quite a bit. And then further, you're going to be wasting time then at that point with your new agency relationship because you've got to go through a rebuild. So in a perfect world, the outgoing agency hands over ownership, they don't delete anything, and you can just move forward and transition smoothly with the new agency. But that's not always the case. And honestly, if you know you don't have access to or administrative access or ownership of your account, for example, if the agency has the billing actually going through their agency side and you're not using your own client side credit card or bank account, that's a huge red flag, and you should probably start working on getting that resolved like yesterday.
Yeah, I've had so many discussions with prospects where they were just locked in. They weren't happy with the agreement that they had, but they had ownership and they just felt like they were stuck. So just really try to avoid that and have ownership of the account. It is your account. You should just be granting the agency access.
Yeah, absolutely.
Red flag number 10, no utilization of back-end revenue or lead data. So this is kind of a follow-up to the previous point that we had where it's just really telling a whole story. So no PPC story is complete without knowledge of what's happening behind the CRM curtain. Just making sure that your agency is focused on from beginning to end whatever matters to you, whether that's revenue or actual enrollments or whatever the case may be, tracking that back, marrying the data, and making sure they're making optimizations and analyzing what really matters. So just be sure that the agency that you're working with, or your agency you're about to work with, whatever the case may be, is that they're looking at the entire story of what's going on and what really matters to your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think that's something that we've, in one form or fashion, talked about with a couple of different versions of this red flag, is that there really just should be a very thorough conversation of the performance in your campaigns from front to back. All right, that brings us to slight spoiler alert, almost our last red flag. This is red flag number 11, and that's that there is no expansion opportunity presentation from your agency through to you as the client. So quite honestly, we just no longer live in a world where any individual client's PPC picture can fully rely on Google and Bing to drive their market and get them through their goals. So most industries and verticals have gotten really competitive. The engines have changed in their landscape. There are more policies and more restrictions. So there are some verticals that can't even get a tenth of the impression share that they got 2 or 3 years ago. So what this means is that as agencies, we have to look at these other channels within search and within digital marketing in order to fully capture a client's full market share and fill their funnel of leads from the top to the bottom. So there have to be expansion strategies in place. At Hannafin, we call this our market expansion timeline, where for the first 2 to 3 months of management with us, we're really going to work on the efficiencies of what you already have in place. Typically, Google, Bing, and most clients are running at least one social network in some form or fashion. So we're basically going to try to build a budget to fund a new channel by finding efficiencies with those that you're already running. Now, make note, I'm not saying by any means that we're cutting out volume. It's trying to improve quality scores. It's trying to make sure that we are capturing a full exact phrase, broad match keyword structure so that we're getting all of our leads siphoned to the least expensive keyword structure within the account. But then we take that savings that we're able to pull out of the current budget and we use it to fund a new channel like Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat is my newest favorite, and or looking at some more robust display efforts for the top of that funnel with programmatic buys through like a Quantcast or Varick Media, a platform such as those. So you really do want to be working with an agency that consistently brings these expansion ideas to your attention, but they don't just bring them to your attention and present them. They bring them to your attention with benchmarks in place for the kind of performance they could produce, a plan for execution, how long they think it would take for those particular engines to really gain the momentum that they need to measure their success, and then they're able to implement them quickly. A lot of those platforms that I mentioned, it's kind of difficult as an individual advertiser to get someone at Facebook or at Quantcast to pick up the phone and talk to you. But when you're working with an agency like ourselves, we have a book of business with that engine, which means it is sometimes a little bit easier for us to get in touch on behalf of a new advertiser being a client of ours and get them white labeled into some of the more beta based social and programmatic tests. So the only caveat I really have for this is if you are speaking with your agency and they bring 20 different expansion ideas to you at once and they want to implement them all at the same time. That can sometimes make it difficult to accurately gauge and judge where the performance changes are coming from, good or bad. And if you're not having this conversation with your agency, period, on the other side of that spectrum, they're just quite simply not pushing your brand the way you're going to need them to continue expanding and getting those incremental gains within your marketplace.
Wow, we got a bonus here. Okay, so red flag number 12. Constantly changing the account manager or team. So we touched upon this topic, but this is just going in further depth. I love this show, by the way, The Office. Too much change is not a good thing. Ask the climate. So just you want to work with an agency that is a good company to work for as well. It's happier clients that are handling your account that you're trusting. They're bringing in experienced, seasoned people that know what they're doing and they want to stay there and they're happy. That makes for a better working relationship for you. And it also just provides you a better expertise on your account. So if people are constantly coming and going, or if you could tell they're just unhappy with their job at an agency, it probably doesn't bode well too much for your account. Not even to mention the fact that switching account managers all the time is going to be a huge task on you. That you have to keep retraining people on how you like your coffee, but just overall the performance that you'll get from people that are unhappy with their job or unhappy where they are. So working with an agency where you could tell that the people are truly happy and they're bringing in experienced people and those people are staying there because they believe in what's going on and they have a future there is it more important than what you would originally think about that. But so just keep that in mind, that you want to work with an agency and a company that the employees are happy and they're valued and they do good work.
Yeah, I think another important piece of this that I want to make sure that we note is you should never expect to not have a change in your account manager. And sometimes it's an indication of something really great that's happening within your accounts. So let's say you get to an agency and at the time you're only running Google AdWords and you're only spending $20,000 a month. There's a different caliber of account manager that's necessary for an account scope that looks like that with that sort of budget, as opposed to one where you grow that and the performance is awesome and you expand into Bing and then also into Twitter and Facebook, and maybe you start looking at programmatic, and a year down the line you've got an ad spend that's in the six figures. You can't possibly expect that necessarily that one account manager has the experience to manage all of those different engines, or maybe they even have to bring additional hands on deck. So now you're speaking with a couple of account managers as opposed to just the one. So there's a change in your team, but in a different way. And there are also situations where we just had this recently here at Hannibin. A couple of our phenomenal senior account managers got bumped up to the associate director level because they need to be able to put their hands in more accounts and work much more closely with a larger spectrum of our account managers and different accounts. So by necessity, we had to then roster a new account manager on with those clients. That means you truly had the brightest and the best managing your account, but now they've got to make a transition. And then this is again where that team structure takes effect, because if you've got, maybe your account manager moves on, whether it be to another agency, to another department within the agency, or just to another level within the services department, you've got a client services manager and another member of the team, maybe from production, who's worked on the account for an extended period of time, and they can really quickly get that team member up to speed so that you don't have to take that task on as the client on your side. So lots of things to consider, but I agree with Danny. Specifically, right, if you're seeing a new account manager every 3 months or so, something weird is happening there, and you probably want to dig into that a little bit more with your team.
Yep.
Excellent. So if you were going through this webinar with Danny and I, and you saw more than a couple of these red flags with your current agency, it might be time to reevaluate. And we've got some additional help for you if you'd like to dig in a little bit further. If you check out the handout section within your GoToWebinar control panel, we've actually got a white paper with 26 total red flags to keep an eye out for. We certainly encourage you to review those. And then worst case scenario, if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you need to review your current agency and you want to maybe try out something new, Hannibin just recently rolled out a new opportunity called our in-house partnerships. So what this allows us to do is really provide that more consultative approach for you and your brand, and then also set aside some specific hours every month for the implementation of some of those things that we uncover with you. This gives you and your team the very positive side of agency resources and thought leadership for less than the cost of one full-time expert in-house. But definitely something to take a look at.
Yeah, and for the cut to the chase, PPC news from the desk of Jeff Allen, who's the president of Hannibin Marketing. If you're interested in capturing that, or receiving that. It's a quick snapshot of what's happening within PPC. It's a monthly newsletter. Jeff is super smart. He knows what he's talking about. He has the pulse of the industry overall. So if you want to sign up to that and receive that newsletter on a monthly basis, I would recommend it. It's at www.hennepinmarketing.com/cut to the chase. You can see the link there and to sign up.
Absolutely. And here in just a second, we're going to get to some questions that we received from the attendees on today's webinar. But first, we want to just make sure that you all know we are absolutely here to help. And I know I mentioned a couple of different times our solutions blueprint. If you are an in-house team and your account is spending $15,000 a month or more on PPC, we'd absolutely love to provide you that free account analysis from our services team here at Hannepin. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you click that button there for yes, I'd like an account analysis from Team Hannepin. And absolutely no pressure. Feel free to also select the button for no thanks, I'm all good, feeling okay about my agency, and really all that you showed me today, Kayla and Danny, is that my team is awesome and I think I'm all set. Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and dig into some questions, Danny. So the first one comes from Katie, and she says, in terms of transparency, should clients have access to all the search terms for which the ad was served? We've had an agency refuse to provide keywords because it shows exactly what we're spending.
Oh yeah.
That's a scary one, and I think, Danny, would your initial reaction be yes, you should have access to all of those?
Yeah, you should have access to the entire account. It's yours. So it should be something that you can go into as much as you'd like. I mean, that's what we were talking about with transparency. They shouldn't be hiding anything from you. It just doesn't sound genuine, or it isn't genuine when someone's working and you hire them and they're trying to hide what they're actually doing for you. So if they're not providing you the keywords and the spend that goes along with them, I mean, if everything is on the up and up and things are fine and they're doing the work within the account, I don't see why they would have to hide any of that. So yeah, that's just kind of against our philosophy. You know, it sounds like they may be the owners of the account, and they just don't want to pass along the information. But first of all, they shouldn't be the owners of the account. But second of all, they shouldn't have an issue sharing any sort of information or data with their client. It doesn't sound genuine.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this actually, there was another question that came in, so we'll just tie these two together. Chris asked, what if an agency applies a 20% markup to Google and Bing PPC charges? He said, we're told this is standard, and is this a red flag, and should they be avoided? Which was going to be my point to Katie's question. If they refuse to show you keyword level data, specifically your cost per click numbers, I would be concerned that they're possibly charging you a markup. So that's another area where we see some agencies coming to the table with really low percent of spend fees, or they charge what looks like a really competitive flat monthly fee to manage enterprise level accounts, but then they are charging that upcharge on the individual click costs. I won't speak for every agency, so I don't want to say if it's standard or not. However, it's just not something that Hannepin does. So all of our clients pay Google, Bing, and their other ad engines directly, whether it be through their own credit card, they set up their bank account, whatever the process might be. But Hannepin does not bill for any ad spend whatsoever. The only thing that we send invoices to our clients for are their management fees, which are based off of spend. However, their spend is dictated by the client, not by Hannepin. So for Chris and Katie, I would definitely take a look at what that structure looks like, and try to find out why there might be that markup on actual PPC charges. And Katie, for you in particular, I would definitely lean in a bit more on that and find out what the true reason is why you can't see that keyword level information.
Yeah, and I've even heard from people within the industry in the past say, oh, this agency told us that they get better deals on CPCs because they have a relationship with Google and Bing and things of that nature. And that's just not true. So if they're feeding you that kind of information, there's something that's behind that, and I would definitely dig into that more. It sounds a little shady.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, great. Another excellent question from Veronica. She asked, how do you deal with conversion attribution arguments with multiple agencies? It's a great question. First and foremost, I think opening up a dialogue between all of the agencies so that you can figure out what every individual agency's thought process is behind what channels get what level of attribution credit in the funnel. Because one thing that we lean into pretty heavily here at Hannafin is that we know PPC doesn't drive all conversions from front to back 100%. There is a lot of room for email marketing, organic and SEO, maybe some of your branded pushes from other networks that you might be utilizing. Where if you look at an individual lead and its total path from start to finish, rarely, if ever, do one of those channels produce the entire experience. So everybody should get a certain amount of credit. The question then comes into how much credit does each individual one get? So Veronica, to that point, I would recommend maybe setting up a call and having a meeting with all of your different agencies and finding out what they're pitching in terms of how much credit the individual channels get. But then also, quite frankly, just pulling the multi-channel funnel reports and looking at it and saying, okay, we see that, let's say organic provides 25% of our initial clicks, but then those clicks only convert through organic 10% of the time. And then you just have to do that really super fun, I'm being incredibly sarcastic, backwards goodwill hunting math to try to figure out just how much credit each individual channel should get based on what level of the experience they were responsible for. Danny, do you
Yeah.
tend to agree?
Yeah, well, I would say if you have two agencies, for example, and one has a certain philosophy and the other one has another, hear them out. Um, Huddle your team together to provide, to do an analysis of what makes sense for your business, because I think it's going to vary based off of the industry and just what's going on within your company. And then just make sure everyone's on the same page and things are consistent. So you'll have to make a decision on which one you're most comfortable with, and just make sure that all the agencies are consistent across the board with what you've decided is the most comfortable situation in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we've got time for one more question. And this one comes from Twitter. And the question is, what's the best way for an in-house team to vet and select an agency to make sure they don't run into these red flags? I think probably the easiest one is download that white paper and just ask them very directly. I personally love it when clients ask me such straightforward questions in the sales process. I know Danny's the same way. Ask me about our fee structure, preferably not on the first call because I'd like to be able to illustrate our expertise to you first. But you should be asking very specific questions about our fee structure, how we rely or how we rested on that structure as how we go about doing things. Ask us about who's going to be paying the ad spend and what you'll be receiving from an invoice perspective from our agency. Ask about how often you'll be speaking with your team and who on our team you'll be dealing with. And one of the red flags that we didn't include in today's presentation, but it's in the white paper, is if the only person you talk to throughout the sales process until you get to sign an agreement is a sales rep like Danny and I, that should also be a red flag. At some point, you should be listening to and hearing from someone within the services side of the department that's actually going to be servicing your account in some form or fashion. So whether that be an associate director, an account manager, where after you get through the solutions blueprint, you say, you know what, it's down to you and one other agency, and I'd just like to meet the person who you're actually considering assigning to my account from a day-to-day perspective, and hopping on a call with them really quickly to have a quick dialogue and make sure that they feel like a good fit. Ask those questions transparently on the front end, because then everybody's got full buy-in and everyone feels much more confident in the decision that you're making with the new agency that you're moving forward with. And it makes that transition process much more smooth.
Yeah, and I would just say be thorough with the process, and use any sort of networking connections that you may have. If you know of a former colleague or a friend of yours that also, has recently hired an agency, if they're happy with them. So use your resources and be thorough in the process to make sure that you're choosing the right agency, because it is a big decision, and there is some commitment involved, and it'll reflect upon you a bit. So just be thorough. That way you have a full understanding of what to expect from the agencies as well as the one that you ultimately choose.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So going to Google and searching for a PPC agency, you may very well stumble across some really phenomenal results. But I would absolutely recommend going to your professional network and asking them who they work with, who they've used, who they like, and starting there. And then if it means going through a more formal RFP process so that you get these really specific and nitty-gritty questions in front of a handful of agencies and getting the responses that you can line up next to one another, it can be a long process, but it can also be well worth the time to make sure that you find an agency that's the right fit, and that avoids as many of these red flags as possible. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining Danny and I today. We really appreciated you taking what could very well be your lunch hour to join us and learn more about some of the red flags that we encounter. You can keep using hashtag ThinkPPC to keep sending us questions. We'll keep taking a look at that over the next couple of days. And also feel free to reach out to Danny and I specifically on Twitter, or send us an email. You can send any of the feedback that you have for us directly to marketing@hanafinmarketing.com. You can also reach out to that email if you've got questions about our processes, questions about the solutions that we could potentially offer, or if you just want them to put you in contact with Danny and I directly. We tend to be on our email pretty much all day, so we should be there. All right,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us.